My name's Mike. I live in Atlanta. 7 years ago, I moved in with Emily, a single mom with 2 kids from her first marriage, Jake and Riley. I was 36 then, too old to be naive, but still stupid enough to believe effort could earn you love. Emily's ex-husband, Patrick, was the kind of man who showed up just often enough to ruin everything. A ghost who arrived with shiny gifts and empty promises. A smile rehearsed for holidays. A father only when it was convenient. He'd come around maybe 3 times a year. Christmas, Riley's birthday, the occasional summer visit when guilt outweighed apathy. He'd bring gadgets, shoes, sometimes a wad of cash folded into a card, and then vanish for months, leaving behind 2 kids swollen with hope and a woman who pretended not to care. And me? I was the one who stayed, the one who paid for everything when the novelty wore off and the bills came due. In those early years, I believed I could build something real with consistency, that being there every day meant more than blood. I worked overtime to keep up with expenses Patrick never saw. Health insurance, car maintenance, braces, soccer camps, new phones, broken phones, rent, and everything in between. I wasn't trying to buy love. I just wanted to make life smooth enough for them to notice I was steady, reliable, present. But presence, I learned, doesn't mean belonging. Mornings started before sunrise. I'd make coffee for Emily, then head to work at the construction firm, hands blistered by noon, back aching by night. Evenings were homework checks, fixed shelves, replaced locks, and endless chores that no one noticed until they stopped getting done. The house ran because I kept it running. It was my labor that made their peace possible. And yet, my name never came up when they said grace. Still, I kept going. You tell yourself that patience pays off, that one day they'll understand. That one day, when they're older, they'll look back and see who was really there. That belief is how men like me survive. Emily said she appreciated me. She said it often, softly, like she was talking to herself. But gratitude without action is just decoration. When Jake rolled his eyes at me, she'd look away. When Riley ignored me, she'd shrug it off. They just need time, she'd say. They've been through a lot. Time. That word became my excuse for everything. I remember the little things. The times I fixed Jake's bike at midnight so he could ride with his friends in the morning. The afternoons I drove Riley across town for art classes she later quit without telling me. The endless parent-teacher conferences where I sat in those 2 small chairs while teachers called me Dad, and I didn't correct them. Every small act was a seed I planted, waiting for a tree that never grew. To everyone outside our walls, we looked solid. Neighbors smiled. Friends praised me for stepping up. People said, "You're a good man, Mike." Not everyone would take that on. I smiled, nodded, and said it was nothing. But inside, I was starting to feel hollow, like a man who'd been writing checks to buy a seat at a table that was never really his. The truth showed itself in small fractures. Comments tossed like stones when they thought I wasn't listening. Dad would never make us do that. Patrick says Mom used to be fun before you. Or the one that stung most. You're not even our real family. Emily always brushed it off as childish talk. They don't mean it, she'd whisper. But every dismissal was another nail in the coffin of what I thought we were building. Then came the night that broke it open. It was a Thursday, nothing special. I'd spent 10 hours under the summer sun pouring concrete on a new housing project. Came home coated in dust, hands scraped raw, smelling of sweat and effort. Emily was cooking pasta, garlic bread, something quick, and the kids were already at the table scrolling through their phones, half present. The air felt tired, the kind of exhaustion that sits heavy between people who've stopped really seeing each other. We ate mostly in silence. The sound of forks against plates filled the room like static. Emily tried to make small talk. Something about Jake's football tryouts, Riley's upcoming exams, but it fell flat. They gave one-word answers, eyes on their screens, and I just chewed slowly, watching the family I'd kept alive slip further from me with every bite. When dinner ended, I looked at Jake and said, calmly, "Hey, can you clear the table tonight?" It was nothing, a normal request, the kind I'd made 100 times before. Jake didn't move. He leaned back in his chair, smirk tugging at his face, and without even glancing up, said, "You don't get to tell me what to do." The words hung there, sharp, deliberate. I frowned. "Excuse me?" That's when he looked up, eyes full of that smug defiance teenage boys wear when they think they've found your weakness. "You're just the guy who pays," he said. "You're not my dad." Riley snorted, tried to hide her laugh behind her hand. Emily froze, fork halfway to her mouth. She didn't say a word, didn't correct him, didn't even look at me. That silence, hers, hurt worse than his words. I stared at Jake, tried to find something in his face that reminded me of all the years I'd stood in his corner. The late nights spent helping him study, the money I'd spent on his broken cars, the mornings I'd left early to catch his games. But all I saw was Patrick, not in his features but in his attitude. That same entitled smirk, that same belief that love is owed, not earned. For a long moment I said nothing. I just sat there, feeling something shift inside me. A quiet snap, like a rope giving way after years of strain. I realized, sitting at that table, that I'd been holding this family together with invisible thread, and they hadn't even noticed I was bleeding. I looked at Emily. Her eyes were fixed on her plate, her shoulders tight. I waited for her to say something, to defend me, to correct him, to remind her children of what respect means. But she didn't. She just sighed softly, as if she were tired of being put in the middle, and said, "Let's just eat. Okay?" That was it. The moment 7 years collapsed. The rest of the meal went on in silence. Jake kept smirking, Riley whispered to him, and Emily pretended not to hear. I chewed the last of my food, swallowed it like gravel, and felt the weight of realization settle in my chest. When I finally stood up, I looked at the table, the plates, the crumbs, the half-finished glasses of water, and thought, this is what I built my life around. This table, these people, and they'd trade it all for one more visit from the man who abandoned them. That night, after they went to their rooms, I sat in the dark living room for a long time. The house hummed with the sound of air conditioning, the faint laugh track of some sitcom playing in Riley's room, the muted beat of Jake's music upstairs. I thought about every paycheck I'd handed over, every choice I'd made for their comfort, every time I'd swallowed pride to keep peace. And I realized something simple. Love without respect is just servitude. For years, I thought my sacrifice was proof of love. That patience, generosity, and consistency would earn me a place in their hearts. But sitting there that night, I finally understood you can't buy belonging. You can only rent it. And the rent is due every time they remember who their real father is supposed to be. When I finally went to bed, Emily was already asleep, or pretending to be. I lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, replaying Jake's words until they lost all meaning and became just sound. You're just the guy who pays. It echoed like a mantra, cruel and clean. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, I decided something would have to change. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Because every man has a point where he stops bleeding for people who mistake his sacrifice for weakness. That night was mine. And though no one in that house noticed it, something fundamental had ended over that dinner. Not a marriage, not a bond, but the illusion that I still had one. The morning after that dinner, the house looked the same, but something inside me had gone cold. It wasn't anger, not yet. Anger burns hot and quick. This was quieter, heavier, like ash settling after a fire. I moved through the kitchen making coffee, listening to the scrape of chairs, the shuffle of feet upstairs. No one spoke to me. Jake grunted a greeting to his mother. Riley scrolled through her phone. I might as well have been a shadow refilling their mugs. Emily asked if I was okay. I said, fine. The word came out flat, almost mechanical. She nodded, relieved not to have to dig deeper. That's how it always was. Surface comfort over real confrontation. When I left for work that morning, I already knew what I was going to do. Not revenge, not punishment, just correction. For years I'd kept everything running so smoothly that they'd forgotten it required effort. Maybe the only way to teach them the shape of that effort was to let it stop. At lunch, sitting in my truck, I opened my phone and began the quiet erasure. First the streaming accounts, Netflix, Hulu, Disney, all under my name. One by one, I hit cancel subscription. Each confirmation email felt like a small click of freedom. Then I called the phone carrier, asked them to remove the 2 extra lines from my plan. The representative hesitated, asked if I was sure. I said I was. She read a script about termination fees. I told her I didn't mind. I'd been paying invisible fees for 7 years. By the time I finished, the sun had slipped behind the office towers, and I felt lighter, almost giddy. Not the joy of cruelty, just the strange calm that follows truth. That evening, Jake was in the living room, controller in hand, eyes fixed on the TV. A notification flashed across the screen. Network connection lost. He swore, tried to reconnect. Failed. Riley yelled from her room that her phone had no service. Emily called out something about the Wi-Fi acting up. I sat on the porch, sipping beer, saying nothing. Minutes later, Jake came stomping outside. "The internet's down," he said. "I know," I replied. "Well, can you fix it?" "No." He frowned. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean I canceled it." The silence that followed was almost beautiful. He blinked, confused. "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm just the guy who pays." And I stopped paying. He stood there, jaw tightening, trying to decide if I was joking. I wasn't. Eventually he muttered something under his breath and went back inside. I heard him tell Riley, who shrieked like someone had died. Emily's voice tried to calm them, but her words held no authority, just noise bouncing off the walls. That night, the house felt heavier than ever. No music, no TV hum, just the uneasy quiet of withdrawal. You don't realize how dependent people become on what they didn't earn until you take it away. Over the next few days, the ripples spread. Riley's phone stayed dead, her friends unreachable. Jake borrowed Emily's hotspot for schoolwork, draining her data plan in 2 nights. Their frustration grew loud, theatrical. They acted as though comfort were a right, not a privilege. I kept my distance. By the 3rd day, Emily cornered me in the hallway. "Mike, what's going on?" "The kids said you canceled everything." "I did." She laughed nervously. "You can't be serious. They need their phones, their internet. School starts next week. They'll survive. We all did once." Her eyes hardened. "You're punishing them." I shook my head. "No. I'm letting them feel the world without me holding it up." She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Maybe she sensed that the man standing before her was no longer negotiating. By the weekend, the silence in the house had turned from annoyance to dread. Riley stopped slamming doors. Jake stopped smirking. Emily kept glancing at me during meals, waiting for the storm to break. But I'd already made peace with the new weather. On Monday, Jake's car insurance lapsed. I knew because the renewal notice had come to my email for years. This time I ignored it. That afternoon he came home furious, waving a letter. "They said I'm uninsured." "That's right. You can't do that. What if I get pulled over?" "Then you'll get a ticket. Maybe call your dad." The name landed like a slap. He sputtered, then stomped away. Later that evening, Riley called from a friend's phone. Her voice was sharp, desperate. "My bookstore card got declined. I can't get my textbooks." "Ask your dad," I said. Silence. The line went dead. I went to bed early that night, for the first time in months. Slept like a man who'd finally stopped carrying a weight that was never his. The following week, Emily tried to restore normalcy. She cooked my favorite meals, asked gentle questions, acted like none of it had happened. I answered politely but kept my distance. She didn't understand that this wasn't a phase, it was a reckoning. One evening she brought up Patrick. "You know he's unreliable," she said. "You can't just expect him to handle things." "I don't expect anything, but they do. Let them see what that costs." She sighed. "They're kids, Mike. They're almost grown, old enough to know who feeds them." She looked at me then, really looked, maybe for the first time in years. "You're not the same man I married." I smiled faintly. "No, I'm finally the man I should have been from the start." That night, Jake's car sat in the driveway, empty tank, dust on the hood. Riley paced the hallway, texting on borrowed phones, complaining that her friends were going without her. Emily sat on the couch, staring at nothing. The house, once filled with noise, was suffocatingly still. It's strange how quickly people forget what you've done for them until it stops being done. They notice the absence like an injury. But absence is honest, it tells you exactly how much you mattered. A few days later, Emily tried again. Mike, this can't go on. They need structure, not punishment. They need perspective, I said. Structure without gratitude is just dependency. She started to cry, quietly, the way she did when she wanted sympathy more than understanding. They didn't mean it. Jake was being a dumb teenager. I stared at her. He said what he believed. Kids don't invent disrespect. They learn it from silence. Her tears stopped then. She turned away, unable to argue. That was when I understood something even darker. Emily hadn't stayed quiet that night because she was shocked. She stayed quiet because she agreed, maybe not consciously, but deep down. I was the provider, not the patriarch. Useful, not loved. From that point, the house became a study in avoidance. Jake left early, came home late. Riley tiptoed past me like I was contagious. Emily busied herself with errands that didn't need running. And I, for the first time in years, enjoyed the sound of my own breathing. When the credit card bills arrived, I didn't pay the charges tied to their accounts. When Riley's art subscription renewed, it failed. When Jake's gym membership bounced, I ignored his text about it. Every decline was a mirror. Let them see their reflection. Then, one night, Emily broke the quiet. She came to me after the kids had gone to bed, voice trembling. Mike, you're not really going to keep this up, are you? I am. She swallowed. You can't just walk away from them. I'm not walking away, I said. I'm just standing still for once. And they're realizing how much they leaned. She covered her face with her hands. You're scaring me. I'm not trying to scare anyone, I told her. I'm just done paying for people who think I'm a stranger. She looked up, eyes rimmed red. So what happens now? Now they learn what life costs when the wallet closes. The next morning I packed my work bag and left before sunrise. When I returned that evening, the lights were off. No dinner, no noise. Just the faint glow of Riley's laptop. Someone had paid to reactivate the internet. Emily must have called the provider. Let her. It was her turn to keep the ship afloat. Lying in bed later, I listened to the house creak. It sounded fragile, like something built on borrowed money and borrowed love. I thought of all the years I'd spent convincing myself that sacrifice guaranteed connection. It doesn't. It only guarantees exhaustion. I realized then that my withdrawal wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you stop trying to prove your worth to people determined not to see it. By the end of that week, Jake's car was still dead, Riley's phone unpaid, and Emily's eyes hollow from worry. The house smelled different. Less like family, more like strangers sharing space. For the first time in 7 years, I felt free. The house went quiet after that week. Not the peaceful kind of quiet that rests the soul, but the brittle kind, the silence that comes when everyone's pretending not to break. The TV stayed off. The music stopped. Even Riley's laughter, once constant and careless, vanished like smoke. Jake spent his days locked in his room, pacing, calling friends, trying to borrow what I had taken for granted. Riley sulked around the kitchen, muttering about how unfair everything was. Emily tried to patch over the cracks with soft words and small gestures. Extra coffee in the morning, a hand on my shoulder, a forced smile. But I could see it in her eyes. Fear, not love. Fear of what would happen now that the machine had stopped running. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I simply existed. There's power in silence when everyone around you depends on your noise to survive. By the second week, the rhythm of the house had shifted entirely. The pantry wasn't as full. The air felt heavier. They'd never realized how much of our comfort came from my invisible labor, how many small miracles it took just to keep life smooth. Now the edges were showing. Overdue bills stacked on the counter. Riley's clothes shrinking because the dryer broke and no one knew who to call. Jake's car unmoved for days because insurance required money, and money required humility. Emily tried to bring it all back to normal. One night, she made a full dinner, roast chicken, potatoes, the kind of meal she used to make when she wanted peace. She poured wine, lit candles, and smiled at me across the table, like we were a couple trying to remember how to love each other. "Can we talk?" she said softly. I nodded, waiting. "You've made your point," she began. "They were wrong. They know it. Jake feels awful." "Does he?" I asked. She hesitated. "He's confused, angry, but he understands he went too far." I sipped my wine. Understanding and respect aren't the same thing. Her smile faltered. "You're being too harsh. They didn't mean it the way it sounded." I set my glass down. "Then how did they mean it?" She looked down at her plate. "You know how teenagers are." "No," I said. "I know how people are when they're told they'll never face consequences." She exhaled, long and shaky. "Mike, you're punishing all of us." "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm stepping back. You all told me my place. I'm just standing in it." That ended the conversation. She didn't finish her meal. Later that night, I heard her crying quietly in the bathroom. The sound didn't move me the way it once might have. I'd cried in silence for years, and no one noticed then. Days passed like that, long, brittle stretches of routine without meaning. I'd go to work, come home, and find the same tense faces, the same whispering behind closed doors. Sometimes I'd hear Jake on the phone with Patrick, his real father. I could tell from his voice that the calls never ended well. Maybe Patrick made excuses. Maybe he just hung up. But every conversation left Jake angrier. He'd slam his door, curse under his breath, and I'd sit downstairs, listening to the sound of a fantasy dying upstairs. Riley stopped asking me for anything. Her defiance shrank into silence. She walked around me like I was furniture. Once, I caught her watching me fix the leaky kitchen faucet, her face blank but her eyes searching, as if she was trying to remember what it used to feel like when I did things for them without resentment. The truth is, the house didn't just fall silent. It hollowed out. It became a museum of what we used to be. Every room held the ghost of some earlier version of us. Laughter in the living room, shared meals, birthday candles. All of it gone, replaced by distance and the steady hum of survival. Then, one night, the collapse finally came. It was late, close to midnight. I was sitting at the kitchen table going through bills. The only sound the tick of the wall clock. Emily came down the stairs wearing her robe, eyes puffy from another round of tears. She stood there for a while before speaking. "Mike, this has to stop," she said. Her voice was brittle, like it might crack if she spoke too loudly. "What has to stop?" "All of this. The silence. The cutoffs. You're tearing the family apart." I looked up at her, calm. It was already apart. I just stopped pretending. She walked closer, resting her hands on the back of a chair. "They're kids. They make mistakes. You're supposed to teach them, not destroy them." "I did teach them," I said. "For 7 years. They learned to take. They learned to talk about the man who left like he was a hero and treat the one who stayed like he was disposable. That's what my lessons became." Tears welled in her eyes again. "So this is it? You're just going to walk away?" "I'm not walking away," I said quietly. "I'm finally letting you all stand on your own legs." Her lips trembled. "We can't. Not like this. Then maybe you'll finally understand what it took to make like this possible." She tried to hold my gaze but couldn't. She turned away, gripping the counter for balance. For a moment I almost softened, but compassion is a luxury you lose after years of being taken for granted. That was the night I made my decision. I packed my things quietly, clothes, tools, personal papers. I didn't make a scene. I didn't announce it. By dawn, everything that mattered to me fit into 2 suitcases and a duffel bag. I set the house keys on the kitchen counter beside a note. It wasn't dramatic. Just a few sentences written in a hand that didn't shake. "I'm not leaving because I stopped caring. I'm leaving because I finally understand what my care was worth to you." When I walked out, the morning air was cool, heavy with dew. The street was still, the sky faintly pink. For the first time in years, I felt light. Not happy, not free, but unburdened. I drove without music. The city blurred past. Gas stations, diners, early commuters. All the noise of a world that didn't care about one man's private implosion. I ended up at a cheap motel on the edge of town. Checked in under my own name. Slept 12 hours straight. When I woke, my phone had 13 missed calls. 10 from Emily, 3 from Riley. I didn't answer. I turned the phone face down on the nightstand and listened to the silence instead. It was cleaner than the silence at home. Over the next few days, the messages piled up. Emily's tone shifted from pleading to anger to despair. How could you do this to us? We can't afford everything without you. The kids are scared. Each one was proof of the same thing. They hadn't missed me. They'd missed the comfort my presence provided. A week later, a text came from Jake. I get it. You're trying to teach us a lesson. We learned it. Can you come back? No apology. No acknowledgement. Just transaction disguised as growth. I didn't reply. I rented a small cabin by a lake an hour outside Atlanta. Nothing fancy. A single room, old wood, a porch that faced the water. I started going for walks at dawn, listening to the wind move through the trees, feeling something like quiet take root inside me. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was the closest thing I'd felt in years. Sometimes I'd imagine them back in the house. The bills stacking, the arguments growing sharper, the realization dawning that Patrick wasn't going to save them. Maybe, eventually, they'd understand that love doesn't come from blood or money. It comes from respect. One evening, I received another message from Emily, shorter this time, stripped of blame. The kids understand now. They're sorry. Please just talk to us. I stared at it for a long time. Then I turned off the phone and placed it in a drawer. Because forgiveness without change is just another kind of debt. I sat on the porch that night, watching the lake turn black under the setting sun. Somewhere across the water, a loon cried, that lonely, hollow sound that makes you feel both human and forgotten. I thought of the years I'd spent building a family from scraps of someone else's life, and how easily it had all crumbled once the money stopped flowing. They say silence costs nothing. But in truth, silence costs everything. Your comfort, your illusions, your need to be needed. And yet, it was the cheapest piece I'd ever bought. The house had fallen. The noise was gone. And in the echo of its collapse, I finally heard something I hadn't in years myself. I've lived by the lake for 8 months now. The cabin sits at the end of a dirt road, half hidden by pines. In the morning, mist rises off the water like breath from something ancient. Some days I sit on the porch for hours, coffee cooling in my hand, watching sunlight crawl across the surface until it turns gold. No voices, no footsteps, no one asking for anything. The silence feels heavy at first, then clean, like oxygen you forgot existed. At night I hear crickets, the distant hum of a boat engine, sometimes rain on the roof. Those sounds have become my new kind of conversation. The rhythm of a world that doesn't need me to keep it alive. For years I believed purpose meant usefulness, that a man without someone depending on him starts to disappear. But out here I've learned the opposite. Dependence is a kind of rust. It eats through the metal until nothing solid remains. Emily still texts every few weeks. At first they were long messages, paragraphs of apology, explanations, attempts at closure. I read the first few, then stopped opening them. Eventually the tone shifted. Fewer words. More silence between them. The last one simply said, "The kids understand now." I didn't reply. Understanding comes cheap when comfort is gone. Jake called once. I didn't answer, but I listened to the voicemail. His voice had changed. Deeper, slower. He said he'd gotten a job at a hardware store to help Mom out. He said he realized how hard it must have been for me all those years. He didn't say sorry, just that he got it. The message ended with static and the sound of him breathing, as if he wanted to add something but couldn't. I deleted it. Riley sent a photo, a sketch she'd drawn of the old house, the 3 of them on the porch. My chair was empty. Beneath it she'd written, "We miss you." The picture was beautiful, careful, but I couldn't stop seeing the space she'd drawn where I used to sit. Even in art, absence defines the shape of love. Sometimes I wonder what the house looks like now. Maybe the paint's peeling, maybe the yard's gone wild. Maybe Patrick shows up again, swaggering through the door with promises and a fresh round of gifts. Maybe the kids see through him now, or maybe they still crave his attention more than his effort. I'll never know. I've stopped checking. The world I built there isn't mine anymore. My days are simple. I work part-time at the marina, fixing engines, sanding hulls, patching fiberglass. Manual work, honest in its demands. When a motor hums back to life beneath my hands, I feel a small kind of peace. Something broken made whole, no one taking it for granted. At noon I eat lunch on the dock and watch the tourists glide by in rented boats, their laughter carrying across the water. Sometimes I envy them, the illusion of togetherness, the comfort of not yet knowing how fragile it all is. Mostly, I'm just glad the noise fades before it reaches shore. At night I write, not letters, not journals, just fragments. Sentences about the life I lived and the life that replaced it. Some begin like prayers, others like warnings. A man who buys respect never owns it. Love that costs one person everything isn't love. It's tribute. They fill a notebook already half full. My only audience the moonlight. There are moments when loneliness creeps in, soft and patient. It waits at the edge of the porch like a stray dog, hoping to be fed. When that happens, I remind myself that loneliness and freedom sound the same at first. You just have to listen long enough to tell them apart. I think about Emily sometimes. About the way she looked that last night. Tired, terrified, realizing she couldn't fix what her silence had allowed to rot. I don't hate her. Hatred requires energy, and I've spent enough of that for a lifetime. I imagine she's still holding the family together with tape and apologies, hoping the cracks don't show. Maybe, in quiet moments, she understands that I didn't leave her. I just stopped saving her. People in town ask if I have kids. I tell them, sort of. They usually laugh, thinking I'm joking. I never correct them. It's easier to let strangers fill the blanks with kindness than to tell the truth. That sometimes a family can eat a man alive while calling it love. One Sunday, early spring, I drove back toward Atlanta. I told myself it was for errands, supplies, parts, but the truth was curiosity. I wanted to see if the old house still stood, if the life I'd built had survived without me. When I turned onto the familiar street, my hands began to shake. The place looked smaller than I remembered. The shutters were faded, the mailbox crooked. A different car sat in the driveway. I didn't see Emily's. I didn't stop. I just drove past slowly, long enough to glimpse the porch, fresh paint, new furniture, but still that same empty chair. I parked a few blocks away, sat there for a while, then laughed quietly to myself. The life I'd carried had moved on, reshaped itself without me. That should have hurt, but it didn't. It felt like watching someone else's movie from the middle, recognizing the faces, but not belonging to the story anymore. On the drive back to the lake, rain started to fall. Heavy, cleansing. I pulled over, stepped out, and let it soak me through. 4 years I'd given everything: money, patience, time, hoping to be seen. And now, standing on the side of a quiet road, I realized I finally was. Not by them, but by myself. When I reached the cabin, the storm had followed me. I built a fire, watched the flames eat through the wood, listened to the hiss as rain slipped down the chimney. I thought of Jake's smirk, Riley's laughter, Emily's silence. All the versions of them that had lived inside me for so long. Then I let them burn too. Later, sitting by the dying fire, I took out my notebook and wrote one last line. Respect isn't something you earn by giving more. It's what remains when you stop giving altogether. I closed the notebook, set it beside me, and watched the embers fade. Outside, the lake was black glass, the rain easing into a whisper. I don't know if they'll ever truly understand what happened. Maybe they'll tell the story their way, that I was cruel, that I abandoned them, that I couldn't forgive. Maybe years from now, when life has carved its lessons into them, they'll realize I didn't disappear out of spite. I disappeared to survive. Every man has a limit. Mine arrived at a dinner table over a simple request to clear the dishes. Took 7 years, one sentence, and a silence that finally told the truth. Now, in this quiet place, I've learned that peace isn't found in forgiveness or reconciliation. It's found in the space where no one demands that you prove your worth. They laughed at the man who held their world together. I left, and the world they took for granted collapsed. And in the silence that followed, I finally heard myself again. So tell me, after all that, was I wrong?